Most recently, sides were drawn in our very own neighborhood when the civil sidewalks, or sit-lie, depending on which side you're on, Proposition L was launched. The campaign for that proposition actually literally launched at a rally attended by Mayor Newsom and many other political operatives, literally in the backyard of one of our neighbors here on the block. Tonight's event is the fifth of such events, community-focused events, where we've talked about homelessness. We use the term community forum as a way to differentiate this type of event from our other types of events that we hold at the bookstore throughout the year. When Praveen and I took over the reins of the bookstore, now just over 3 years ago, we saw the opportunity to provide a space for a community conversation, a space where we could constructively discuss challenging topics such as homelessness, share, learn about, and potentially reveal real needs and possible solutions to a very complex situation. In prior forums, we've hosted academics, researchers, homeless service providers, and policy influencers, current and former homeless individuals. We are very pleased tonight to combine two talks. The first by author, researcher, and Professor Teresa Gowan, whose remarkable firsthand experience is documented in rich and thoughtful detail in her book, Hobos, Hustlers, and Backsliders, Homeless in San Francisco. And then at 8 p.m., if you'd like to stay and join us, we have a second event of the evening, and it is a celebration of the launch of Through Our Eyes. The cameras were disposable, but our lives aren't. It's a brainchild of the directors of the Homeless Youth Alliance that are also our neighbors and on this block. So let's get started. Let me make a very brief introduction of Teresa. Over the course of several years, and as a doctoral candidate at the University of California at Berkeley, she walked alongside and documented her conversations and experiences with 38 homeless men living on San Francisco's city streets. She visited the places where her street companions slept, ate, and hung out. She followed these men, ages 32 to 64, on their visits to hospitals, shelters, welfare offices, and law courts, and she observed their interactions with doctors, social workers, and police officers, among many others. Many of these men she followed are what we might perceive as high functioning, 20 of which she described as pro or professional recyclers, who trace habitual routes to collect cans and make day-to-day cash from this laborious occupation rather than through the alternatives of panhandling, stealing, drug dealing, or sidewalk sales. Now an associate professor at the University of Minnesota's Department of Sociology, where she pulled her field notes and research into this book. She continues her research in a related area of interest, the interaction between drug and addiction rehabilitation, examining the crucial role of addiction and rehab within contemporary understanding of poverty and crime. Please help me welcome to Booksmith, Teresa Gowan. Thank you.
So much to Praveen and Kristen for inviting me here. Is that good? Yeah. Okay. Is that better? Yeah. So, my book, Hobos, Hustlers, and Backsliders, it's a study of how we think about homelessness, both in terms of elites who get to shape the field of the homelessness industry, as a lot of people call it, but also how people on the street understand being homeless. And what I argue in this book is that there's three main ways that Americans have come to understand what homelessness means. Homelessness is a moral offense. Homelessness is pathology. And homelessness is the product of systemic injustice or instability. And in my book, I call this sin talk, sick talk, and system talk. Each of these narratives sets up opposite causal stories about homelessness, and each of them demands fundamentally different strategies to deal with the problem. Sin talk summons up the twin strategies of exclusion and punishment, sick talk calls for treatment, and system talk recommends broader regulation, reform, or even transformation of our broader society. And I'm sure you're all very familiar with this debate in the Haight. So what I do is in the first couple of chapters I establish the salience of this schema, partly by looking throughout US history, because as early as 1850, these arguments about homelessness were raging. But the center of the book is my ethnography that Kristen was talking about. And this is when I spent thousands of hours hanging out on sidewalks, in alleys and encampments frequented by homeless San Franciscan men. It's a book about men. Despite the constraining hands of the police and the shelter system, men living outside managed to make surprisingly different ways of life. Many pushed back against the degradation and anomie of life on the street, searching to bring together more bearable ways to be homeless. I show how congregations of street dwellers separated off into different subcultures and spaces. And I particularly highlight the divide between the Tenderloin as the geographic and symbolic center of the street scene, and Dogpatch, which at the time was a remote and peaceful edge zone. The chapter Word on the Street roams more widely through the San Francisco street scene, including the Haight, uncovering a spectrum of street discourses on the causes and character of homelessness. What I saw was that the guys on the street took up these popular discourses of sin, sickness, and the system, and they reworked, blended, and subverted these materials. Sometimes they were acting strategically, like, when you would go into a shelter and would have to give an account of yourself in order to enter a program, you might perform a sick narrative in a strategic kind of way. But just as often, they were taking on these stories with passionate sincerity, fighting for some coherent understanding of their past and present experience that might reduce their confusion and despair. I'm going to start with a guy called Charlie, who was a sidewalk vendor down by the BART station in Powell Street. The good thing about San Francisco for the homeless, said Charlie, it's that we've got enough people here that they can't run us out of town just for being poor, Some of these small towns, you stick out straightways and they come for you. Someone makes a call and the cops get on your tail. You could be just walking down the road like anyone else. No cart, no nothing. And they pick you up. Now here, it's not like we don't have our problems with the cops, but all the same you're in it with other homeless folks. People that aren't scared of sticking up for themselves. And it's not a racial thing, generally speaking. We're all in it together. Leaning against the wall of the Civic Center station entrance, Charlie rolled a thin cigarette with his last scraps of tobacco. Most of the people walking by scanned his offerings out of the corner of their eyes and continued on their varied ways. He didn't have much on his carpet today. Some ugly ties, a pile of aging computer textbooks, a blender, a couple of electric razors, one without a cord. But 20 minutes ago, he had made $5 on a Giants jacket, which left him fairly satisfied with the day so far. Two men approached, parking their shopping carts loaded with cardboard tubes to the side of his carpet. "How you doing?" asked a friendly-looking Latino in a wrinkled Hawaiian shirt. "Not so bad. Finally got that damn air conditioner off my hands. I'm not taking any more of those." "What about you boys? How's the dumpster diving?" "No, it's okay. Haven't done much today. Yesterday we found a couple of phones you might like." "I've only got one. Pipe. Where's the other one?" His companion pulled the other out of his cart. Charlie looked over the phones. "They're okay, but I'll never get this one clean. How about $3.50 for the two?" They settled on $3.75, and Manny and Pipe turned back towards 6th Street. Okay, what was I saying? Yeah, now San Francisco, you can make a few bucks with sidewalk sales or selling the street sheet or canning, which is another word for recycling, right? If you don't go against the cops, they might leave you alone. And then there's other people too that know what's going down. people who have sympathies for our side of the situation, you know. The coalition, food not bombed. A man don't feel so alone in the world. You don't have to hide. It's bad enough being homeless. You don't want to have to hide like an animal. So Charlie, this African-American guy in his 40s, been on the street quite a long time, but he articulated an analysis of homelessness as just poverty, a case of innocent people down on their luck being pushed around by merchants and cops. He saw some of the other people on the street as bad characters, to be sure. But he put his faith in people like Manny, living out his claim that homeless people in general were a diverse group drawn together by economic hardship. They were neither inherently sick nor sinful. Now, what I did was I worked a bunch with the recyclers, and I thought I was going to do the study of recycling. But then when I realized I wanted to look at the whole range of homeless identities and ways of working on the street, at least for the guys, I realized I had to study the Tenderloin some, because this really was kind of like ground zero in terms of being an institutional ghetto, but also because of the really strong sin talk among the guys on the street. The homeless men and women who spent their lives drifting around the streets and parks of San Francisco's Tenderloin tend to be streetwise. Most other homeless people come into this service-rich neighborhood to get what they needed, and then they bid a hasty retreat. Those who stay tend to be the ex-cons, the former drug dealers and pimps, prostitutes and thieves. And the condition of these down-and-out players, riven with strokes and hepatitis, tuberculosis and AIDS, marks all too clearly the brevity and brutality of the hustler's life cycle. One of the guys I got to know was Del, a homeless crack addict and sometimes dealer. Del spent much of his time leaning against a wall on Eddy Street, his eyes scanning for drivers with that intense, uncertain look that might mean business. His spare frame was frequently shaken by violent coughing, which he did his best to ignore. I suspected tuberculosis, but he wouldn't get tested. The interesting thing to me was Del loved the Tenderloin, the same place that the recyclers strenuously avoided as a pen for fuck-ups, in the words of Karloff. Del saw it as the hot heart of the city, the place where the action was, the drama, the life. Places jumping, he crooned appreciatively, scanning the drug market on the sidewalk. Shit, bunch of bad motherfuckers around here. Watch out, San Francisco, ain't gonna get no peace. Del took pride in slinging rocks, but he was really the most small-time of dealers. Nobody trusted him anymore, because, you know, he was only actually able to maintain his claim to deal because of the generosity of his supplier and nephew, Sonny. Sonny told me, "See, my daddy said always keep an eye on Uncle Del, watch his back." His father was doing time in Corcoran. So I let him have a few rocks. If I don't keep with him, I know he'll go get himself killed. Shit's gone bad. Morris, one of the African-American recyclers, a lanky, serious man, crossed the Tenderloin at least twice a day on his long journey between the South of Market and Pacific Heights. Del might greet Morris with, "What's up?" and a wave, but Morris only nodded politely and moved on. Del was offended by the unwillingness of the recyclers in general to give him the time of day. They acting like they're better than the rest, always trying to look busy, like they got something real important to do. He sneered. They're still raggedy-ass black men. Policemen ain't gonna see no difference. All sorts of people do this recycling thing, Del argued. Those old Oriental people, they're doing just the same thing. We're all making a few pennies. But those dudes, he gestured at the corner where we'd just seen Morris, they're just making a big old fuss about it, like they're working for the city or something. And that other brother with the bushy head and his supersized, rattling old smelly train he acts so proud of, no time to talk and you should get out their way. Who the fuck do they think they is? They're bums, dope fiends and bums. How do you know? I said. They out here. They're homeless. The connection was self-evident. The term set by Sin Talk, which is the oldest and the most powerful way that we have of looking at homelessness still, I believe. Homelessness is it represents a product of past and present transgressions, bad choices to pursue self-indulgent and destructive desires. And the homeless mustn't believe this just as strongly as the people who are trying to get rid of them. They really had exactly the same map of the world. On the one side was the turf, the street, with its main character, the wily, hedonistic, heartless hustler. On the other lay the straight world of domesticity, religion, and hard work. At its center, a role of patriarchal provider, formidably hard to achieve. Both their words and their deeds resonated in harmony with the voices calling for a crackdown on street people. The hustlers rejected the idea that they were despised, abandoned, and powerless. And I came to really understand why they clung to the strong agency of being a willful sinner. So Dell, for example, constructed every single interaction he had with healthcare or service agencies as an opportunity to display his hustling craft. He refused to play the victim. So, for example, this one time I saw him, he had this new jacket, leather jacket, and I was like, oh, that's nice, where'd you get it? And he's like, oh, I got it from this agency, which gave out food and clothes. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. And he said, yeah, I really played that lady, and I played her. And I was like, well, isn't that what they want to do, give you clothes, right? But he wanted to see it as something which he had managed to take, rather than that somebody had just given him. And I really came to understand it. Initially, I found the hustlers kind of difficult to understand, but in the end, I started feeling that I too, if I was in this position, would start to see myself, to take pride in my ability to survive on the street, because it's one of the few things that you can take pride in. And sure enough, I saw quite a few people who moved more towards a hustler identity during the time that they were on the street. Now, the Tenderloin, at the time I was studying, which was like through the 90s and early 2000s, really became this battleground for these discourses on homelessness. With the rise of the transitional shelters, right, when the shelter system moved away from the old emergency shelters, which didn't really regulate how people behaved at all, towards the transitional shelters, the sin talk and sick talk started to really meet head on, drawing this line in the sand between the agencies and the street, inside and outside. And this stark spatial division got mirrored in the way that the agency workers characterized the street as out there, an unhealthy, chaotic zone where people were dominated by their addictions and lived in denial of their sickness. The caseworkers of the service agencies offered a form of absolution from sin, an opportunity to exchange one's career of vice and self-indulgence for a case history, to give up the dirt and danger of the street and remake one's life one day at a time through a lengthy process of introspection and self-reform. You're not a bad person, former homeless addict and drug counselor Timothy would tell his clients. You have a serious, life-threatening disease. By far the most powerful strand of sick talk within the homelessness industry, and in fact I would say across the poverty management institutions of the US, is the language developed by the 12-step movement, which is now institutionally mandated as the approach of choice for homeless folks, and it's lent added legitimacy by the strong social movement base of AA and related groups. So in other words, I sort of feel that our institutions kind of they rely on AA to reintegrate folks. It's sort of a cheap way to help people get a new social network and get established, in that they'll educate them in the ways of AA within treatment, and then hope that this will be enough when they go out there to do 60 meetings in 60 days and stuff. But unfortunately, I feel that it's great for some people, but it really doesn't work that well for a lot of the folks who are out there. I mean, for a start, many people don't have such serious problems with addiction. And I'm going to read a section about a guy called Carlos to try and show a bit of how this works. Sometime around 2 a.m., Carlos jerked awake as a hunting knife ripped through his homemade tent. He staggered to his feet, fighting blind and awkward, but he didn't move fast enough. A few hours later, he regained consciousness, covered in urine and beaten so badly he needed 8 stitches in his skull. Afraid to return to the street, Carlos let a hospital social worker find him a place in a transitional shelter. And so he was pretty happy to start off with, to be somewhere where he could recuperate. And he got interested in a couple of the classes that shelter was offering. With clean clothes and a fresh shave, he looked 10 years younger. A couple of Sundays into the program, Carlos took the subway to Oakland to see his cousin Lucy. She was doing well, married to a wealthy Filipino called Ronald. He slapped Carlos on the back and gave him a huge meal at the restaurant. Carlos got the impression that they were feeling guilty for not doing enough for him in the past. And sure enough, he got a call offering him a week or two's work decorating 2 apartment buildings belonging to an acquaintance. When Carlos requested permission to take the job, his case manager shook his head firmly. It's not work you need right now. You're provided for here. You need to work on your recovery. But according to Carlos, work was exactly what he needed. He called me from the shelter, nearly crying from frustration. I don't know what to do. They're going to kick me out of the program if I take the job. It's so fucking stupid. Like this guy Wayne, the case manager. He's not so bad, but he's so sure it's all about drugs, you know. Sure, I've got a cocaine problem, and I take that very seriously. But I really need to work. It's work which will get my head straight. You know how I am, how recycling keeps me in line. I just have to work. I have to be doing something with my hands. Have you asked him about it? I mean, have you told him how important it is for you to get work? I asked him. Sure I have. I've really tried to work with these people, straight up. But Wayne just laughs at me. He says he's been there himself, and he knows I'm full of shit. Denial. Everything is denial with those people. You've got to work on your issues, he says. All I know is, for me, work is a big fucking issue. The biggest. I came to this town for work, and this is the first decent job I find, and they won't let me stay in the shelter if I don't go to fucking AA every day. Wayne says it doesn't look like you're trying to make changes. Jesus Christ, it's like all the change has got to be you. You're the asshole. Everything else is just fucking dandy. Well, maybe it's not that simple. Maybe I just need a break. So Carlos was one of the many folks that I met on the street who had moved here because of the construction industry, and he'd been looking for work ever since he arrived. Now, of course, Wayne might have been right that he would just go out and spend the money he got from the painting job on crack. But I mean, in this case, he really wasn't right. Carlos decided to take the job. He made enough on it to stay in a hotel for 6 weeks, one of the Tenderloin hotels. And when his money ran out, he spent the last of it on a tent and sleeping bag. Ronaldo had promised him more work in the future, but for the moment he was back on the streets. So, I really wanted to talk more about the recycling stuff, and because that was really the core of my fieldwork for a long time. And I studied in Dogpatch. At that time, there was very little going on there. There was a little bit of light industry, but it was a fairly abandoned area. People didn't even know where it was at all. I would tell people I was studying there, and they'd be like, "Oh, kind of like by the Caltrain station, or oh yeah, like 3rd Avenue is that?" And what this meant was that for homeless folks who were trying to get away from the Tenderloin and not be part of the kind of endless sort of fighting with the cops that you get in places like the Castro and here, they could camp out there and actually get some stability, make community. And a lot of the pro-recycler folks ended up living out there, and it was partly because the recycling plants were out there, the places where they could get the best rate. Because if you were really into recycling, you wouldn't go to the supermarket redemption places, because you could get better rates and you could also get much more wide variety of materials sold at the recycling companies. And I'm going to read 3 pages or so and finish with that. Okay, I'll extract it a little bit. But I want to talk about these 2 guys, and I chose this one because they did spend some time in the Haight, but they're a little rude about it. But if you really kind of get a sense of how people drifted around the city trying to find ways of being homeless which seemed a bit more acceptable to them than others, and I have a lot of examples of that in the book. In the spring of '76, Manny Vitella waded over the Rio Grande to join his sister's family in LA. He'd already seen a lot of the world for a 25-year-old. Son of Italian Peruvian factory workers in Lima, he'd started working in construction at 13. At 19, he had hit the road, peddling jewelry from Iquique to Santiago, Montevideo to Medellin. He settled for a while in La Paz, where he started working in the drug industry, processing cocaine for export. Then he heard that his sister had married somebody in the US, and he thought, hey, I want to take my chances there. His fantasy of coming prosperity took an immediate knock when his middle-class Cuban brother-in-law met him with distrust and disdain, refused to let him stay more than 2 nights, and forbid Manny's sister from lending him any money. But Manny decided to try his own way. He wandered north to Santa Barbara, found himself a job as a gardener, and developed a sideline dealing marijuana to high school and college kids. So basically, he got a green card through marrying an Anglo girl, but he got caught bringing some weed up from Santa Barbara to San Francisco, and he really fell foul of the war on drugs and got himself a very substantial sentence. In Corcoran, Manny found himself cellmates with Pipe, a jumpy, disturbed white Californian. Pipe was a former foster kid who'd spent much of his life locked up for theft or drug possession. His face and neck advertised his con status with the wavering lines of prison tattoos, and he'd really never done any work outside of prison labor. But these guys became best of friends, even though they were sort of an odd couple. When Manny got out of Corcoran, he made his way to San Francisco and to Pipe, who was already out. Manny was determined they were going to find work and go straight. Pipe was less optimistic. 6 weeks turned up nothing but irregular day labor, so Pipe slipped back into stealing. They tried in vain to find some place they could afford on the few $100s a month they were putting together from Manny's GA and Pipe's stolen car radios. There was no way these guys were going to use the shelters, so they scoured the city for good places to camp. They camped for a while in Presidio, and they were also trying to grow marijuana there, but we kept getting pulled up before they could get anywhere with it. So after finding their camp destroyed the 4th time, they gave up, and they schlepped what remained of their possessions over to Golden Gate Park. Growing marijuana wasn't too promising there either. At this time, the city was making a concerted effort to route this kind of activity out from the undergrowth. And Manny and Pipe found they couldn't even keep a camp going for more than a few days. Pipe didn't like the scene on Haight Street anyway. Manny thought it was cool enough, but he's Mr. Mellor, To me, it's kind of weird. The shops and houses are all fixed up, and then you've got a bunch of kids hanging out and whining about Jerry Garcia. Hey, come on, be nice for a change, interrupted Manny. Like they got some kind of Summer of Love rerun, said Pipe. Manny shoved Pipe firmly enough to get his attention. Thing is, we couldn't get our shit together there. We couldn't get no peace and quiet, set things up nice. If I'm going to be homeless, at least I've got to have a decent camp. So I was bitching away to this dude, and he said a bunch of people he knew had gone over the other side of Potrero, mostly to get away from the cops. And they hadn't moved back to the Haight, so he thought maybe it was worth checking it out. Manny and Pike took the 33 bus over to Potrero, found a cart, rattled their possessions in a tortuous zigzag over the hill, finally dropping down over that 18th Street bridge. Manny was really blown away by the view. As soon as we were standing on that bridge, I got the feeling this was the right place. Here you are, right on top of the freeway, but just over there you've got the bay, these quiet little streets. Most places in the city are people, people, people. I like quiet. So these guys set up camp in Dog Patch, and one of their neighbors was Clarence, who was African-American ex-soldier, who's one of the main characters in this book. Clarence was kind of cautious about these guys. You could tell they were ex-cons. But he cautiously welcomed them, and he gave them a tip about a mattress he'd seen on a sidewalk. So they, started to set up their camp. And they were watching him coming back from the city, rolling these massive trail of recyclables down 3rd Street. And they're like, whoa, what's this guy really up to? This looks like a big operation. Manny said, hey, can I come along with you? Clarence was a bit worried that Manny was going to rip him off, but he said, okay, all right, I'll give you a chance. Gradually, Manny and Pike became recyclers themselves, and they spent their days pounding the street for bottles and cans. Sitting beside the fire at night, they made endless jokes about being honest working men, reformed characters, etc., and they got to know this whole bunch of folks who were living out there. And it was really, they were able to leave their things and have them quite safe, because there was 12 people in their kind of extended camp, and they would always leave at least one person there. The reason I really like this particular story is because Pipe, who spent his whole life in the system basically, really changed his personality while he was living in Dog Patch. One time I climbed up Twin Peaks with him, and he was looking at the bay and musing about the possibility of getting work on a ship. He said, it's so cool being around these dumpster diving guys. What's coming to me is how the system doesn't want us to trust each other, to treat each other with respect. In the prisons, in youth authority, they make it dog eat dog, like they encourage all this violence and petty bullshit between the inmates. That's what Manny was always saying in the joint, and he's right. You don't really think about it beyond this or that guy you're avoiding or this deal you're making. You don't think about the system, the real system, that's got, 2 million of us locked up. No, it's like a lot more than that. And me, a lot of years, all I've been doing is staying in their stupid little system like there's nothing else out there. You forget you could have some other kind of life. So protected by his buddy and able to make some limited, sort of licit cash, vaguely legal cash, Pipe felt much more distanced from his small-scale maneuverings within the criminal economy. He was surprisingly quick to drop his old cat-and-mouse games with neighborhood cops. And I thought it was interesting that, because there wasn't that much police action over there, he became much less interested in having an identity as a criminal, right? And Manny noticed this as well. He said, hey, Pipe's chilling out over here. He's always been cool, he's got a good heart, but he's usually kind of jumpy. I'm the easygoing one. I used to say Ombre did too much crystal, it's got into his system, but it's true, he's chilling. He's not like turning around or looking over my damn shoulder every 3 seconds. It's good, it's relaxing. So in this different geography, in this different social milieu, Pipe's petty criminal ways didn't seem so fixed after all. And I just wanted to leave you with that because I really think that so much of the bad behavior that people find distressing from homeless folks is in reaction to being picked on all the time. And it was really fascinating to me that when people could get stability, even people who were absolutely the kind of criminal street people that, you know, a lot of folks were afraid of, could become different kinds of people. I'll leave it there. I don't want to go over it.
Great. Thank you, Teresa. So we have about 15 minutes for questions, and then Teresa will be signing at the front of the store at the table there. Her book is for sale at the front counter. It's a fabulous book. I didn't say that in my introduction, but it's so rich in detail, and she talks in depth about this framework that she introduced, syntax, system talk, and syntax. And so I wanted to open it up for questions, and Teresa, if you can repeat the question for the video, that would be great. Does anyone have any question that they want to start off with?
Were you safe at all times?
Well, yeah, I was pretty safe. I think San Francisco. Oh, sorry. So she was asking me if I was safe doing this work. You know, a lot of people have thought that it would be very dangerous work, but it really wasn't. And when I went to do what I thought was going to be like a major comparative case in St. Louis, that's when I really found dangerous work. Everybody was scared over there of each other, and the homeless folks were kind of hiding out. But here, you know, because San Francisco is so full of people, it tends to be a safer place than most U.S. cities, because there's usually folks around. And I found that the people I was making relationships with were very protective of me. They would look after me. They would sometimes tell me to go home if they thought that it wasn't a safe situation, and I actually felt just fine. I usually have my bike with me as well, which is good, you know, in terms of getting out of bad situations.
I can talk loud. I'm loud.
Have you heard of Gabor Mate?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is there any reference to him in your book? And do you have an index in your book?
Yes.
Groups like Food Not Bombs and Gabor Mate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, I actually wasn't aware of Gabor Mate's work when I wrote this book, but I am now, very much so. And you know, I think his ideas on addiction are very interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
How would you characterize the street scene in the Haight Ashbury as compared to other parts of the city?
Well, I mean, I'm not the expert on the Haight because, you know, I started off doing research in the Mission and South of Market, and then I did a lot in Dogpatch, as I said. I did have some folks that I was working with up here. They were mostly, didn't have that much to do with the folks who were, you know, really kind of living on Haight Street, because they were recyclers. So they would sort of move through the area rather than being part of that scene. It was quite divided between the youth homeless scene and the older guys. And so, you know, within the street scene, the kind of attitudes like Pipe was expressing, sort of an impatience with the youth homeless was quite common. And, you know, I got the feeling there wasn't much sort of mutual communication going on between those groups. There was one exception that I worked with, a guy called George, who was a Greek-American blue-collar guy, who was quite radical, and he worked with the coalition giving out the leaflets, that sort of Know Your Rights leaflets, and he worked a lot with the youth on Haight Street and had good relationships with them. But you know, what happened to him was that over time he joined one of the bottle gangs around here, and he just became an absolutely lost alcoholic. You know, he was never sober after a while, and it was very sad to see, because this was somebody who really wasn't like that at all when he was first on the street. And I remembered him. He started drinking heavily in order to sleep at night, and that was true for a lot of people. That he found it scary and cold and uncomfortable, and just drinking a lot was the only way he could sleep. But then he also joined, got protection from being part of a group, but that group was all about drinking, and it turned out to have a really bad effect on him. So, that was my experience there.
During the Newsom, last mayor's administration, supposedly 12,000 homeless people were put into permanent housing. Yet when I walk through the city, I have the feeling nothing has changed. Is the reservoir of homeless people getting refilled from people that come from the outside, sort of to reach a certain capacity, that the city has? Or what's going on? How many people are actually native, and how many people come from other places to this town?
Okay, well, I can't talk too much about what's going on right now because I'm not researching it at the moment. But my friends in the advocacy organizations are telling me yes, there's a whole bunch of new homeless folks, who've been displaced by recession related kind of financial problems, right? Which is what you'd expect. In terms of Newsom housing 12,000, I think I don't think that's the right figure. I think it's much lower than that. But it's still significant for sure. What I would like to address is this question of are they outsiders who come here for the services? Because I think that's partly what you're getting at, right? And this certainly was not what I saw. There was a lot of people that I worked with who were not from San Francisco, but most San Franciscans are not from San Francisco, right? So in that they're absolutely the same as the rest of us. And people hadn't come as homeless people in the vast majority of cases. They had come, looking for work or come out of prison, to the Tenderloin, which was one of the centers which people would come to. And I really think you can't understand anything about US homelessness without understanding the role of the prison system in destabilizing people's lives. So many of the folks that I met out there had just come straight out of jail, for example. I meet people walking around in their pajamas, so don't you have any clothes? No, I was just let out of jail like this, And people are so much less employable, they're traumatized, often they can't deal with institutional authority at all. So, I do think that the flow back in from the prisons was significant. So some of those folks were from smaller California towns or from, the far reaches of the Bay Area. And there was a sense of strength in numbers in San Francisco, but I very rarely heard people saying that they were, coming here for the GA or anything like that. It was more, as Charlie was saying at the beginning, when I was reading out, there's a sense of, well, there's enough of us here, and there are people who are looking out for us. Whereas, we can just get completely, oppressed in other places.
What about coming for the tourists? And,
coming for the tourists?
The weather.
No, I really didn't see that. Like I say, most people did not come here as homeless folks at all, right? They became homeless while they were here. And, a lot of them had gone through a long process of gradually having worse and worse housing, living in cars, and then losing their cars, and just sort of slowly going down to the very bottom.
We have a question back here.
Hi, your book was recommended very highly to me by a friend, so congratulations. And I was just wondering if you had a particular strategy of doing research, or were there particular organizations that you kind of checked out in order to find people that had interesting stories to tell?
I read the homelessness literature, what people had already done, and a lot of it was being done within shelters. And I was kind of determined to try to approach it from the other end and approach people on the street, and then sort of look at the institutions more like from their perspective. And so I really kind of went out there on my own. initially, of course, it's harder when you have no contact. So I was sort of cold calling people. I would just go, oh, I see you're doing recycling. Would you mind talking to me about it a bit? And then if somebody was interested in talking about it, I'd say, could I work with you? And then I'd sort of start building a relationship like that. So with the recyclers, I got into this sort of social network and sort of snowballed out from the first people into like a whole huge community, really. And then in the Tenderloin, it was harder for me to start doing the research there. And I was kind of lucky because I met this guy who I call Link, who was a classic sort of what we call in sociology key informant, like a person who was really interested in my study, wanted to help me do it, and he didn't really have much to do. He was very bored, and so he would just like sit with me for hours in the Tenderloin, chatting to me and then introducing me to people. And so I was just incredibly lucky to have him as my kind of mediator in that situation.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions.
Hi. Now that you have had a taste of it, hands-on experience, right? What is the one thing you would like to say to us as a species, just so that we can stop this cycle?
Yeah, I hear you. The one thing. Oh. That's a really good question. I'm sure I'm not going to come up with the best answer right now, but I do think that we should stop fearing people because they're poor and, try to create situations where people can be the best people they can be and not the military, perhaps. Right? That's kind of how I felt doing this research, was that the places where it was better to be homeless were places where people were being left alone more. And I think human beings have got a natural disposition to make community, to trust each other, and to behave decently. I really do believe that. And unfortunately, what we do to poor folks in this country is we lock them up, brutalize them, or we try to get them to go into shelters, which is supposed to heal them. But a lot of the evidence is that even though the shelter systems and rehab work for a small minority of people, for a lot of people it actually depresses them and demoralizes them.
Ooh, uh-oh. I think we have a broken chair.
Are you okay?
I'm okay.
Oh.
Here, why don't you go ahead and take my chair over here.
I'm almost in the back.
Okay, sorry about that.
So to finish what I was saying to you, I really feel that the right to make your own space, to have these makeshift encampments which have some stability, which make it possible for people to develop trust, and to be allowed to do things like recycling without being criminalized are absolutely key. I mean, of course, really I would much prefer that we had a proper social safety net and we didn't have homelessness, but given that we're not doing that, in terms of how we treat the homeless here right now, I feel that letting people respond to their poverty in their own way rather than telling them what they have to do and putting them in institutions is the humane thing to do.
Hi. I know that you're not totally plugged into what's happening right now, right here, but I don't know if you heard today that Twitter just finalized its deal to move its headquarters into San Francisco. In the Tenderloin, the stipulation is that it must be in the Tenderloin/Civic Center, and they must participate in cleaning up that area. I had really mixed feelings about that. What's your off-the-cuff reaction?
I'm very bemused at how Twitter is going to clean up an area. Right? I think, there's been a million attempts to try to clean the tenderloin out of this city, you know, and it is incredible that it's still there between the Civic Center and Union Square, right? There are people here who could talk better than I could perhaps about this issue, but you know, this whole idea that we're going to get rid of poverty by cleaning up areas seems insane to me. And you know, it's like, well, yes, out of the folks that I worked with on the street, a lot of the people who had more resources did end up leaving the city, which is what everybody wants, right? But it's not like they stopped being poor and stopped being homeless. It's like, you know, they ended up living on the frontage road across the bay looking at the city, or, you know, hiding out in the state parks. It doesn't do anything to solve poverty, getting people out of the city. It merely just says the city is a playground for rich people, and, you know, those who don't have enough money have to leave. And is that really how we want to conceive of our city? So I say go away, Twitter.
I have the last question. I'll reserve the last question for myself. So, Teresa, you and I spoke for about an hour on the phone before you agreed to come and talk with us, or I guess after you did. And I posed the question for you. What do you think about the Upper Haight and how we should approach our challenges of youth homelessness in the neighborhood? And I kind of pressed you on what are solutions, and I know that you kind of stopped short in the book from really proposing solutions, but how do you propose we go about creating solutions?
Well, like I say, you know, as I don't study youth homelessness particularly, I feel like I can't make too strong of a statement in that direction. I mean, I do think there's one thing I would say about it, which is in a way an obvious point, but I think a lot of people are hostile towards the homeless youth in the Haight because they see folks who they think are intentionally homeless. And you know, we know that a lot of those youth do actually come from extremely difficult backgrounds. You know, the people who are studying it, there's throwaway kids, runaway kids, abused folks. But I would say that even for the people who are more drawn as a magnet to the youth subcultures around here, that you have to differentiate between how somebody starts being part of that and what happens to them after a while. And, you know, really, there's no justification, I think, for, you know, just sort of saying, oh, you chose this, once somebody is, you know, covered in tattoos on their face and is not going to be able to get a regular job again, or, you know, has developed some serious substance abuse problems. So I wish we could get away from that kind of, you know, intentional homeless, therefore totally non-deserving thing. I mean, that's one thing. Another, which relates more to the Haight in general, is, you know, I do find it really disturbing, this idea that it's going to help the neighborhood to close down the recycling center, the Haight Recycling Center, because, you know, I feel that recycling is one of the very few ways to have dignity and do something which is vaguely pro-social, vaguely useful to other people, that exists for homeless folks. And it really just seems insane to me to close that down and to force, you know, yet more people into panhandling, or whatever other kind of petty criminal things that they're doing to get by. You're not going to force people into shelters that way. I mean, people don't want to live in shelters. Those who do go there, and the others do not want to be in shelters. And so you're not going to help those people by cutting down, you know, this little area of autonomy and self-respect. I think it's a huge mistake.
Also, Haight Ashbury food, Haight Ashbury Free Clinic has had to merge with Walden House, and just heard today that food pantry in the Upper Haight is in danger because of funding.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Well, I think the recession has hit all of the social services in the city budget. And okay, well, thank you everyone for coming for this portion of the evening. Stay tuned for the second portion of tonight's evening. I'm going to escort Teresa to the front of the store, and if you have any questions for her, I'm sure she'd love to entertain them. She'll be at the signing table, and books again are for sale at the front counter. And hang on, in about 5-10 minutes, we'll have a setup for the Homeless Youth Alliance a presentation of a book called Through Our Eyes. The cameras were disposable, but our lives aren't. That'll be at 8 o'clock. Thank you.